Shabbat Shalom. So nice to see you all. Just gonna tilt this a little bit so I can. Okay, here we go. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, Melissa. Shabbat Shalom to the Hermans. Shabbat Shalom, Annette. You look beautiful. Shabbat Shalom, Branch. Shabbat Shalom, Karen. Elon, so good to see you. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, Rick. Shabbat Shalom, Ed. Shabbat Shalom, Jeff. Shabbat Shalom, he's not in yet. Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's so nice to see the faces that I can see. We will begin on page 103. If you are in the Lev Shalem, if you are in the Sidur Sim Shalom, we will begin on page 65. And if you're in the full volume Sim Shalom, we'll begin on page 10. If you're able to do so, please rise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher tasrichu min alevchem min yom uvein layla. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shesani betzamo. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shesani bat chorin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shesani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, zokef kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, rokah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamichin mitzadei gaver. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shesali kol tzorki. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, ozer Yisrael bigvura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, oter Yisrael betifara. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hanoten layev koach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamavir sheina meinai. Utnuma me'afapai, v'yirtzeh mafanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'lev atinu shati. Utenenu hayom v'chol yom lechenu chesed rachamim beinecha v'nei koreinu v'tigmalenu chasadim tovim. Baruch atah Adonai gomel chasadim tovim l'mo Yisrael. You may be seated. We'll turn now to page 120, or page 81, or page 50. Mizmor shir Chanukat habayit leDavid. Arim Chanana kilatani v'lo tzemach v'li Adonai shviti. Eilecha Adonai ekra ve'el Adonai etchanan. Eilecha Adonai ekra ve'el Adonai etchanan. Shema Adonai v'choneni. Adonai ozer li. Shema Adonai v'choneni. Adonai ozer li. Leheman yizamecha kavod v'lo yidom. Adonai Elohai le'olam odeka. Mourner's Kaddish, page 121, page 82, or page 52. Yit gadal ve'yit kadash shemei Rabbi. Be'alma divra kirte ve'amlich malchute. Bechayechon uviyomechon uvchaye dechol beit Israel. Ba'agala uvizman kari ve'imru amen. Yehi shemei Rabba mevarach leolam lomei almaya. Yit barach ve'yishtabach ve'yit pa'ar ve'yit ramam ve'yit naseh ve'yit hadar ve'yit ale ve'yit halal shemei dekudesha brichu. Le'ela min kol birchata ve'shirata tush bechata ve'nechemata da'amiran be'alma ve'imru amen. Yehi shalama Rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. If you're able to do so, please rise the following page for Baruch She'amar. Baruch She'amar v'haya ha'olam, Baruch hu, Baruch HaSever Shi, Baruch HaMer v'Sever. Yachid Che'olami, Melech Meshubach v'Ardei Ad Shemo Gadol, Baruch Atah Adonai, Melech Mehulav Atishbachot. You may be seated. We'll turn now to the middle of page 126 or 86 or 58. Hoshia et amecha uvarech nachlatecha urim 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 v'nasim ad haolam. Hoshia et amecha uvarech nachlatecha urim 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 v'nasim ad haolam. Now Shinaki Atah Zermani Wasmachmani. ואני בחסדך בטחתי, יגל ליבי בישועתך, אשיר אל אדוני, כי גמל עלי. Page 128, page 88, or page 62. לדוד בשנתו את עמו לפני אבי מלך בגרשהו וילך ברך. מי האיש החפץ חיים, אוהב ימים לראות טוב, נצור לשונך מרע ושפתיך מדבר מרמה, סור מרע ועשה טוב, בקש שלום ורודפהו. עיני אדוני הצדיקים עליו. פודה אדוני נפש עבדיו ולא ישמו כל החוסים בו. If you're able to do so again, please rise. I'm getting you working your upper and lower body this morning. Page 132, page 92, or page 72. Hodu l'Adonai ki tov, ki le'olam chasto. Hodu l'Elohei Elohim, ki le'olam chasto. Hodu l'Adonai. שבשפלנו זכר לנו כי לעולם חסדו ויפרקנו מצרינו כי לעולם חסדו נותן לחם לכל בשר כי לעולם חסדו הודו לאל השמיים כי לעולם חסדו. You may be seated for the psalm for Shabbat. Just a few pages ahead, page 134 if you are in the Lev Shalem. Mizmor shir leyom haShabbat, tov l'Adonai l'zamar shemcha l'yom l'gibor chasdechon. Magad l'masecha Adonai me'adam kumach shavatecha yishbar lo yada. Od yenuvun b'seiv ושנים ורעננים יהיו להגיד כי אשר אדוני צורי ולא עוולת בו. על המלאך ילבש לבש אדוני עשית עזבתי ובאתי מות. עדותיך נאמנים מאוד לביתך נאווה קודש אדוני לאורך ימים. Page 136, page 96, or page 81. Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha Od Yehalelucha Od Yehalelucha Selah Hashem Shekachalo Hashem Shalom Elohim. פותח את ידך ומסביר לך רצון צדיקים וחודך תהילת אדוני ידבר פיו ויברך כל בשם שם קודשו לעולם ועד ואנחנו נברכיה מעתה ועד עולם. הללויה הללויה הלי נפשי את אדוני על אדוני וחיי זמלאי ויודיעתי. אדוני שומר את גרים יתום ואלמנה יעודד ודרך רשעים יעוות. ימלוך אדוני לעולם אלוהיך ציון לדור ודור. הללויה הללויה Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Page 139, page 99, or page 86. Hallelujah, 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 Adonai min hashamayim, hallelujah, b'meromim, hallelujah, melachav, hallelujah, kol tzeva'av, hallelujah, shemesh ve'yareach, hallelujah, kol kochvei hor, hallelujah, shemei hashamayim ve'amayim, asher me'al hashamayim, yehallelu et shem Adonai ki utziva v'nivrahu ve'yamidem le'olam chok natan ve'lo yavor, yehallelu et shem Adonai ki utziva v'nivrahu ve'yamidem le'olam chok natan ve'lo yavor. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Hallelujah, Adonai min ha'atzilim kol ha'kol ha'shavah. V'hayarim kerlemot tehila lecho chasidav livnei Israel am karavo. Hallelujah. Psalm 150, page 141, page 100, or page 88. Hallelujah, halu el bekocho, halu birkia uzo, halu vigrotav, halu karukulu. Kol anshamate, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Kol anshamate, hallelujah, hallelujah. Kol anshamate, hallelujah, hallelujah. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, amen ve'amen. Baruch Adonai Mitzion Shechin Yerushalayim, hallelujah. Baruch Adonai. If you're able to do so, please rise the top of the next page. Tahu Adonai Elohim, Asher b'chatav Avraham, v'etzatem me'or kasdim, v'samta shemo Avraham, v'etzat levavo, ne'eman lefanecha, v'charot imroha v'teteteterech. והים בקעת לבניהם, ויעברו בתוך הים ביבשה, רדפיהם השתחו בצלות, כמו אבן במים עזיים, ויושר אדוני ביום ההוא את ישראל מיד מצרים, וירא ישראל ממצרים מיד. ויאמינו באדוני ובמשה עבדו, אז ישיר משה בני ישראל את השיר הזאת לאדוני ויאמרו לאמור, השיר לאדוני כי יהוגה, סוס ברכו רמה בים. Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, ki l'adam ha'chama v'shem goyim, ve'elu moshim be'aretz lishpat et arisav, ve'hayta l'Adonai hamlocha, ve'haya Adonai lamelech kol haaretz, bayom ha'hu Adonai echad, u'shemo echad. You may be seated, page 145, page 104, or page 334. Nishmat kol chai, tevarech et shimecha, Adonai Eloheinu, Nishmat kol chai, tevarech et shimcha, Adonai Eloheinu. Yanai, yai, 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 nai, nai, yai, nai, nai, yai, nai, nai, oh, yai, nai, yai, yai, nai, nai, yai, nai, yai, 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 nai, yai, yai, nai, nai, yai, nai, nai, oh, yai, nai, yai, yai, nai, nai, yai, nai, nai, Baruch kol basar tefartem min alav נהלכך נשבחך נברכך נברך את שם קודשך כמו לדוד ברכי נפשי את אדוני וכל קורבי את שם קודשו היל ותעצומות יוזך הגדול בכבוד שמך הגיבור לנצח ונורא בנורתך המלך היושב על כיסא רם ונישא. It's my pleasure to have our rabbinic intern, Josh Jacobs, lead us in Shacharit. We'll begin with Shochen Ad on page 147, page 105, or page 336.
Shochen Ad Maharom V'Kadosh Shemo V'Chatuv Rananu Tzadikim Badonai Lasharim Nava Tehillah B'fi Yesharim Tithalal Divrei Tzadikim Titbarach U'Bilshon Chasidim Titromam U'Kerev Kedoshim Titkadash ובמחלות רביבות עמך בית ישראל. שכן חובת כל היצרים לפניך אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו להודות, להלל, לשבח, לפאר, לרומם, להדר, לברך, לעלה ולקלס על כל דברי שבחות ותשבחות דוד בן ישי עבדך משיחך.
Please rise, page 148, or wherever Yishtabach falls on your siddur.
ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו. ברכות והודאות מעתה ועד עולם. ברוך אתה אדוני אל מלך גדול בתשבחות, אל ההודאות אדון הנפלאות, הבוחר ישרי זמרה, מלך מלכי העולמים.
In a moment, Josh will lead us in the blessing following the Baruch Hu, so you may be seated, and we won't be calling pages between this part of our service and the end of our silent Amidah. So for right now, we're at the top of page 150, page 107, or page 340, and Josh will take us through all the blessings following.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, יוצר אור ובורא חושך, עושה שלום ובורא את הכל. הכל יודוך והכל ישבחוך. אין כערכך ואין זולתך, אפס בלתך ומידו מלך, אין כערכך אדוני אלוהינו בעולם הזה, ואין זולתך מלכנו לחיי העולם הבא, אפס בלתך ומשיח, תחיית המתים. Page 151. El Adon al kol hamasim baruch baruch b'fi kol neshama godlo v'tuvo malei olam da'at u'tvuna sovevimoto hamid ga'er al chayot hakodesh v'nedar b'chavod al merkava zechut u'mishor lifnei chiso chesed v'rachamim lifnei kvodo טובים מאורות שברא אלוהינו יצרם בדעת בבינה ובהשכל כוח וגבורה נתן בהם להיות מושלים בקרב תבל פלאים זיו ומפיקים נוגה נאה זיוום לכל העולם שמחים בצאתם וששים בבואם עושים באימה רצון גונם פאר וכבוד נותנים לשמות סולה ורינה לזכר מלכותו קרא לשמש ויזרח אורה והתקין צורת הבנה שבח נותנים לו כל צבא מרום תפארת וגדולה שרפים ואופנים וחיות הקודש לאל אשר שבת מכל המעשים. Tibarach Mosheinu al Shevach Maaseh Yadecha ve'al me'orei or shesita yufarucha selah. Tibarach Tzureinu Malkeinu v'golenu b'rei kadoshim. Yishtabach Shemcha la'ad Malkeinu. Kulam ahovim, kulam beruim, kulam giberim v'kulam osim, beim avir atzon konam, v'kulam patchim et piam b'kdushav Torah, b'shirav v'zimram mevarchim u'meshavachim, u'mefarim u'maritzim, u'makdishim u'mamlichim, et shem ha'el ha'melech ha'gadol, ha'gibor v'hanara kadoshu. וכולם מקבלים עליהם המלכות שמיים זה מזה, ונותנים רשות זה לזה, להקדיש ליותם מנחת רוח, בשפה ורבים הקדושה, כולם כאחרונים ואומרים ביראה. קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך לארץ כבודו. והאופנים וחיות הקודש ברעש גדול, המתנסים לרמת שרפים, ומתם משבחים ואומרים Baruch kavod Adonai mimkomo. La'el baruch nimod yitenu, la'melech el chai v'kayam, zmirot yomer v'tishbachot yashmiu, ki hu levado poel gevurot, oseh chadashot bal milchemot zoret tzedakot, matzmiach shua perefuot, norat hilot adon haniflaot. המחדש כתובו בכל יום תמיד מעשה וראשית, כאמור לעשרים גדולים כי לעולם חסדו. Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir v'niskech k'lanu meher le'oro, Baruch atah Adonai Yotzer ha'me'orot. Ahava rabba avtanu. והביאנו לשלום מארבע כנפות הארץ, ותוליכנו קוממיות לארצנו, כי אל פועל ישועות אתה, ובנו בחרת מכל עם ולשון, וקרבתנו לשמך הגדול סלה, באמת להודות לך ולייחדך באהבה. ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר עמו ישראל באהבה. שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד. Adonai Elohechem emet. לדור ודור הוא קיים ושמו קיים, וכיסו נכון ומלכותו, באמונתו ליד קיימת, ודבר החיים קיימים. Emet shatahu Adonai Elohim v'lei avotenu. Malkeinu melech avotenu, golenu gol avotenu, yotzreinu tzrishuatenu, podenu matzilenu melam shemecha, ein Elohim zulatecha. Ezra avotenu atahu me'olam, magen Moshe livnei mechrim b'chol dor v'dor. Tehilot le'el Elyon Baruch Hu Borach Moshe u'Miriam u'bnei Yisrael v'chanu shira v'simcha rabba ve'amru chulam mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai mi kamocha nedar Bakodesh Norah Tehilot Sefer Leshira Chadasha Shipul Geolim Leshimcha Sefat Hayam Yachad Kolam Hodu V'him Lichu Ve'amru Adonai Yimloch Leo Lam Va'ed Yanana 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 Nai, Tzur Yisrael, Kuma Bezrat Yisrael, Udechinu Mecha Yehuda Yisrael, Go Aleinu Adonai Tzvot Shemo, Kedosh Yisrael, Baruch Atah Adonai, Gal Yisrael. Ose shalom bimromavuya, se shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru amen. Ose shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru amen.
Yasher Koach to Schatz. We are now going to turn to our Torah service, so you may be seated. If you are in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, we're going to be starting on page 279, chapter 45 of Genesis, verse 28 is where the first aliyah begins. I just want to give you a little bit of background about the parsha that we're in right now, Vayigash. This is the parsha where finally, at the end of the Joseph story, which, by the way, every year I look forward to this story. I think this is a beautiful part of our Torah. I love the musical, so that also helps. But I think that it is a really fantastic story that just has so many elements. And I've never, I guess I'm not that old, but I haven't found a year yet where I have come across something and thought of it in the same way 2 years in a row. It is a story just with so many different dimensions. And this part of the story is the end where we are now back to reconciliation, right? The beginning of the story starts off with the brothers throwing Joseph into a pit. And we're now at the end of the story where Judah really is the one who brings them all back together. And Jacob, in this moment of really revelation, right? He reveals himself to his brothers, and then the reconciliation can continue. Not to put them on the spot, but we are today going to be talking about the Haftarah in connection to the Torah. So if Rick, you and Larry want to think of things that you might want to share from what you shared on your podcast, you're more than welcome to. We don't have a Haftarah reader this morning, and so I wanted to be able to connect the two. We don't have a Haftarah reader on purpose. It's not that someone backed out. The reason that we decided not to have a Haftarah reader is for some of these weeks we wanted to be able to focus more on the learning, and so this has been a week for many, many weeks that we knew we weren't going to have a Haftarah reader. However, I wanted to bring in some of the Haftarah learning and be able to acknowledge that is a text that we that would be read if we were doing a quote traditional service. So this part of the Torah that Barry's going to read for us in a moment is right when Jacob finds out that Joseph is alive. So we're about to hear a lot of names. We're about to hear all the lineage of the different sons. But if you want to look earlier on in the Parsha, you can see how that reconciliation comes to be, which is what I'm going to talk about later in the text study as well. So Barry, you will begin for us with a bracha, and then we will begin chapter 45, verse 28. Again, page 279 if you're in the Eitz Chaim.
Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher ki shana b'tzavtzav v'tzivanu laso b'divrei Torah. Vayomer Yisrael Rav od Yosef b'ni Chai achal ve'enu b'terem amud. V'yisa Yisrael v'chol asher lo v'yavo be'ra shavam v'yizbach zevachim v'lachei avid Yitzhak v'yomer Elohim l'Yisrael b'merod halayla v'yomer Yaakov v'yomer hineni v'yomer Anochi Hoel Elohei Aviham al tira mi'adal Mitzrayma ki l'goy gadol asim kasham Anochi ered imcha Mitzrayma v'alchi achacha gam alom v'yosef yashid yado al einecha.
Second Aliyah, verse 5.
Vayakom Yaakov mi Beersheba Vayisu b'nei Israel et Yaakov avichem v'et apam v'et anashechem v'agalot asher shalach paro l'aseit otom v'yichu et minechem v'et Sham asher rachu be'eretz Canaan v'yavo mitzrayma Yaakov v'chol zaro ito banav ufnei banav ito banav banav v'chol zaro hevi ito mitzrayma.
Third Aliyah, verse 8.
V'yele Shimon b'nei Yisrael, Habib Mitzrayma, Yaakov, Uvanav, Lachar Yaakov, Reuven, Uvnei Reuven, Hanok, Palu, V'chetron, V'chanim, Uvnei Shimon, Yemuel, V'yamin, V'yachan, V'char, V'chaul ben Haknani, Uvnei Levi, Gershon, Merari, Uvnei Yehuda, Elnan, V'Shelah, V'Feret, V'Zarach, V'Yamot, Elnan, V'Eretz Canaan, V'Yu, Eretz, Yitron, V'Chamum, Uvnei Yishachar, Talak Uvafaha, Uvayom V'Shimron, Uvnei Zevulun, Sered Ve'elyon Yachaleim, Ele B'nei Leah, Asher Yadal Yaakov, Adan Aram, V'yetina B'ko, Kol Nefesh Bana, Av Shloshim V'Shalosh.
Koch, very sorry I didn't say the fourth Aliyah. It happened so quickly. I didn't realize that the third Aliyah had ended. We're going to pause now for Amisha Berach. If there are any names that you would like to recite, please do so, even if I won't be able to hear them, so that you can hear them and bring them into your consciousness. There are many people in our community, both the Temple Beth Am community, the Los Angeles community, and of course the world, who are in need of healing. So I implore any of you who don't have specific names to just think of those who are in desperate need of healing and of strength. And as I've now made reference to a few times, I find that our Misha Berach in the Sidur is profound for many reasons. One, that we stop to pray for healing, but another, because we don't only pray for those who need the healing, but those who take care of those who need healing. And so for all the caregivers and those who are making sure that people are getting the best care that they can have so that they can find healing, that is something to also pray for. And especially on the precipice of this vaccine getting around the country, the world, being a moment of real recognition of those that are helping us heal. Misha Berach Avatinu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Imotinu Sarah Rivka Recha v'Leah Hu yivarech v'yirpeh et Zehava Yafa bat Esther ve'et Nima bat Malka ve'et Rivka bat Pesha ve'et Arnarila bat Yehudit ve'et Leah Friedel bat Bracha Krendel ve'et Catherine bat Sarah ve'et Stanley Greitzer ve'et Leah bat Freya ve'et Harav Yaakov Baruch ben Uri ve'Chava ve'et Yosef Menachem Mendel ben Gittel ve'et Yehuda ben Avraham ve'Sara ve'et Friedel bat Rachel ve'et Gutman Wolf ben Frume Gutta ve'et Metuka Sar bat Sheno Golda ve'et Bela Esther Gittel bat Fega ve'et Ben Zion ben Gittel ve'et Chaya bat Sarah ve'et Yaakov ben Avraham ve'et Yoel Ari ben Esther ve'et Eliyahu ben Shena Shira ve'et Yelena Kramer ve'et Yehudit bat Li bat Sivya ve'et Yitzchak Yaakov ben Paya ve'et Yisrael ben Afrihada ve'et Aharam Avraham ben Adina ve'et Yosef ben Yeta ve'et Rivka bat Nechama ve'et Shmuel Mordechai ben Tova ve'Eliyahu Chaim ve'et Neshama Rachel bat Sarah ve'et Chava bat Yaakov ve'Sonia ve'et Yitzchak ben Leah ve'et Hillel ben Yaakov ve'et Cyril Chana bat Tzivya ve'et Alan Gary ve'et Ezra ben Yerachmiel ve'Friada ve'et Joel ben Flora ve'et Golda ben Faiga excuse me, ve'et Esther bat Liba, ve'et Risa Chana bat Chasha Gehula, ve'et Avraham Simcha ben Avraham ve'Sara, ve'et Harav Eliezer ben Sion ben Chaya Golda, Vet Sarat Cyril bat Miriam, Vet Yisrael bat Koren, Vet Menachem ben Lili, Vet Pesach Yitzhak ben Yehudit, Vet Natan David ben Baruch Vemina, Vet Sylvia Kaufman, Vet Blake Estes. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yimalei Rachamim Aleihem Lahachazikam L'Rafotam Ve'Shlach Lahem Me'era Refuah Shlema Min HaShamayim Refuat HaNefesh U'Refuat HaGuf Betoch Shar HaCholim V'Chazek Et Yedei Ha'oskim Betzorcheihem Shabbat Milizuk U'Refuah Krova Lavo Hashta Bagala U'Bizman Kariv V'Nomar Amen. And all those in need of a speedy recovery and all those who are helping with that recovery find blessing and strength in this coming week. We'll continue now with our fifth aliyah, verse verse 16. Sorry, that was verse 16, still in chapter 46, page 281 in the Eitz Chaim. Again, chapter 46, verse 16. And Barry, if you're not unmuted, let's unmute you. It's okay, he's coming. Don't worry. He just has to find your name.
I couldn't unmute it.
There you go.
Uvnei Gad, Tzifon v'Hagin, Shoni, v'Etzbon, Eri v'Arodi, v'Ariel, Uvnei Asher, Nimna v'Yashvam, v'Yeshvi Uriyam, v'Serach, Uvnei Briam, Heber Machiel, Elam b'nei Zilpam asher natan Lavan le'am beitohom v'teled et Ele Yaakov sheish esrei nafesh. B'nei Rachel ishet Yaakov Yosef v'Binyamin v'Yvaled li'Yosef eretz Mitzrayim Asher Yadalo Asnad Bad Poti Pera Kohen Ohod Et Menashe V'et Ephraim Uvnei V'Benyamin Bela V'Fecher V'Yaspel Gerav Aman Achim V'Rosh V'Him V'Ard Elah B'nei Rachel Asher Yulad Le'Akov Nefesh Asar.
Last aliyah, verse 23, chapter 46.
Uvnei Dan, Hushim, Uvnei Nephtali, Yatziel, V'Guni, V'Etzer, V'Shileim, Elah, B'nei Bilhan, Asher Natan Lavan, L'Rachel, B'Toho, V'teled et Ele Le'Yaakov Kol Nefesh Shiv'ah Kol HaNefesh Arba'a Le'Yaakov Mitzrayma Yotzei Recho Milvad Neshe B'nei Yaakov Kol Nefesh Ishim V'Sheish Uvnei Yosef Asher Yulad Lo B'Mitzrayim Nefesh Shanim Kol HaNefesh Levet Yaakov Abba Mitzrayma Shivi.
Yeah, sure. Koach, Barry, and I'm so glad that Kathy was there so that we could hear the ends of those aliyot. I want to just point out this last verse here that talks about the number 70. I read a beautiful commentary, and those of you who listened to the podcast with Rabbi Shapiro and I this past week, I talked about a little bit that there's this moment when we have all these different numbers, and I'm sorry that I'm forgetting who the commentator was. It might have been Radak, who says the numbers that are used are including God like God, not God, the name of one of the sons, not G-A-D, and that God was seen as one of the characters, one of the players in this counting, that God said to Jacob in that maybe dream, maybe that just premonition that he had at night that we saw earlier in Barry's reading, that he would always be with him. And so this commentator mentions that if you actually count, the numbers will be wrong, but that you'll get to 70, or the whole number in other cases, like when we're leaving Egypt, for example, that you'll get to the number if you add God as a character into that number, which I found to be a very beautiful and very powerful way of thinking of the ways that we count. Do we count those who are with us in memory or in spirit, not just those who are physically with us? So I saw Rick Muller's face when I said we weren't going to have a Haftorah, and I'm always trying to make sure that we're all pleased with our Shabbat morning experience. So Rick, I'm going to introduce what I'm talking about. Will you read for us just the verses that we're going to focus on? Okay, great, fantastic. Okay, so everyone will be happy. So I wanted to bring today, you'll see that this is a very long source sheet. The only reason it's long is because I didn't want you to have to flip through an Eitz Chaim. But really it's just verses from a Chumash. So we're going to, in a moment, go through, and I know that I haven't done the prayers for Israel and all those things. We're going to do them afterwards. So if you think that I've forgotten, I haven't. But I wanted us to go through how the Haftorah connects to the Torah. We very rarely do that. I know that Rick and Larry have been trying to do a little bit of that in their podcast, but we very rarely talk about the connections. We either talk about one or the other. And to me, this connection is not only a powerful connection, but is one that I think is actually maybe more prevalent in the Haftorah than it is in the Torah. I find that at the end of the Torah story of Joseph and his brothers, that there's something kind of left to the imagination that the Haftorah seems to be picking up on. And now remember, when we read Haftorah, like for example, today ours is from Ezekiel, we're not reading the entire book of Ezekiel. So it's not as if Ezekiel, the character, was put on this earth to finish the story of Joseph. But I do believe that this part of the Ezekiel story was chosen for us to be able to kind of wrap up that story of Joseph. So we're going to look at verses from both the Haftorah and this week's Parsha. I believe I have one or two from last week's Parsha and one or two from next week's Parsha as well, in terms of finalizing this story of Joseph. So Rick, if you'll read for us verses 15 through 22 of Ezekiel 37, and then we'll go through them in English.
15 to 22.
Yeah, 15 through 22, yeah.
Okay, great. With a blessing or no?
No, just the reading.
Okay. Vayhi dvar Adonai elai lemor, ve'ata ben adam, kach lecha etz echad, uchtov alav lihuda, ve'livnei Yisrael chaverav, ulkach etz echad, uchtov alav liosef etz Ephraim, v'chol beit Yisrael chaverav, v'karav otam, the two sticks, echad el echad, le'etz echad, v'hayu lachadim beyadecha, v'chasher yomru elecha, b'nei amcha lemor, halo tagid lanu ma'ele lach, daber alehem, ko amar Adonai Elohim, hine ani lokeach et etz Yosef asher be'ad Ephraim, v'shivtei Yisrael chaverav, v'natati otam alav et etz Yehuda, v'asitim le'etz echad, v'hayu echad biadi, V'ayu etzim, the two sticks. Asher tichtov alehem beyadcha leinehem v'daber alehem ko amar Adonai Elohim hinei ani lokeach et bnei Yisrael miben hagoyim asher halchu sham kibatzti otam misaviv Veveti otam el admatam, V'asiti otam legoy echad ba'aretz be'arei Yisrael, umelech echad yiyeh lechulam lemelech, ve'lo yiyu od lishnei goyim, ve'lo yechatzu od Lishtei mamlachot od.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we're going to read through the verses now in English. And my hope is that this is going to be a conversation. So you're going to be able to, if you're comfortable unmuting yourselves, doing so and adding your voice to the conversation. First, I'm going to read through the verses. And then my question to you is going to be, what does this remind you of? Okay, so just have that in mind while I'm reading through. What do these verses remind you of? The word of Adonai came to me. And you, O human, take a stick and write on it of Judah and the Israelites associated with him. That's one stick. And take another stick and write on it of Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and all the house of Israel associated with him. Bring them close to each other so that they become one stick. Now, I'll use a little bit of a visual here. My dad has these things here, so I'll use them. So bring them close to each other so they become one stick, joined together in your hand. And when any of your people ask you, won't you tell us what these actions of yours mean? Answer them, thus said Adonai Elohim, I am going to take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and of the tribes of Israel associated with him, and I will place the stick of Judah upon it, and make them into one stick, and they shall be joined in my hand. You shall hold up before their eyes the sticks which you have inscribed, and you shall declare to them, thus said Adonai Elohim, I am going to take the Israelite people from among the nations they have gone to, and gather them from every quarter, and bring them to their land. I will make them a single nation in the land, on the hills of Israel, and one king shall be king of them all. Never again shall they be two nations, and never again shall they be divided into two kingdoms. So what does this make you think of? What does this remind you of? Yes, Jennifer Lowe.
10 Commandments,
Okay, interesting.
the tablets.
Yeah, great. Okay, the 10 Commandments, having two separate tablets and bringing them together. Great, Barry?
Didn't Yaakov use a stick with a sheep, with Lavan, spotted sheep? Didn't he use a stick?
To divide them all out?
Yes.
It's possible. I don't remember the stick as a thing, but it makes sense that he would. So probably, yes. Yeah. Other Devorah, you're unmuted. Do you want to share something?
Well, it also reminds me of a marriage. You take one person and another person from two completely different backgrounds, and they come together as one and make one family.
I love that. I love that. I love that. It is something that I say under a chuppah all the time, and I did not think about it in this context. So thank you. That's a beautiful way of thinking about it. Other connections. David, are you moving closer to say something? Yeah. I think you just have to unmute.
Does this have to do with the reunification, like in the Messianic era, with all the tribes of Israel coming together, reunifying, just like the brothers reunifying?
Exactly. So that's the connection I'm about to make also. But yes, that's exactly right, that we're trying to see everyone as being at different points and now being brought together, and they're using this, whether you want to believe that it actually happened or if it was a metaphor, of bringing these two sides together and making them into one.
Wonderful.
Yeah, Larry.
Muted.
Sorry. So at the risk of going against your teaching,
Right?
first thing I want to say is that Alter mentions that Ezekiel is surely the strangest of all prophets,
Yes.
and that he was actually maybe even mentally ill and other things about him.
Oh.
Secondly, we should remember, we probably don't know, that this reading the Haftorah follows immediately the story of the bones. So
Right.
it's the second half of that very same chapter. Thirdly, Ezekiel lived just at the beginning of the fall of the Second Temple, more than a century after the first kingdom, the northern kingdom, had already been conquered. So all of those tribes, which are the brothers of Joseph, are already gone, either to assimilation or to exile.
Right.
And in fact, the two that he's talking about, he talks about Ephraim, which Ephraim was the place where Shiloh was, which was the home of the kingdom of Israel. They're already dispersed. And Ephraim, of course, was the son of Joseph. When he talks about Joseph and Ephraim, he's talking about the kingdom of Israel.
Right.
He must have had a memory of them, but it's unclear where they were. And the other one is, of course, Yehuda, who's the hero of our story.
Right.
So he's trying to reach back into history to bring back a unification that kind of cuts against the story in our Parsha, which is Joseph as opposed to the brothers.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to go against my teaching. I actually think that what you're saying is, though my thesis is that the Haftorah helps us bring the story together, I think behind the thesis is that the story of our Torah doesn't say this, doesn't bring them together. We might see that they see one another again, but not to give any spoilers, I don't actually believe that there is such reunification at the end for these brothers. It's still always Joseph against his brothers, but then when we get to this Ezekiel piece, as you're mentioning, somehow we're taking history and we're changing, well, maybe not changing it, but we are reinterpreting it so that we can bring those two together. Yeah, great. Gabriella. Just unmute yourself before you talk.
Well, what it also reminds me of, thank you. What it also reminds me of is the unification of the Jewish people from many corners of the earth into coming to Israel.
Sure.
In fact, I just read about a population, if you will, a group from India called the Bnei Israel. Bnei Menashe, sorry. Thanks, Haley. That are coming to Israel, and they're claimed to be from these tribes that were lost.
Oh wow, I have not read that. That sounds fascinating.
That was Times Israel Times, or one of the things that I get.
Yeah, wow,
There are 3,000 of them already in Israel.
Oh my goodness, that's fantastic.
So
Judy, I see you. Oh, sorry, Gabriella. What did we say?
You know, so several hundred more have come. We met when we were in India. We met a representative of that, and he'd come from far away. And I'm not saying in an airplane. He came on foot.
Sure. Yeah. Wow.
So it's very gratifying for us, having seen him, to know that his people are unified now. And of course, the army is the great unifier in Israel anyway. So the kids will all be unified.
Yes, there are many different ways that people find those commonalities in Israeli culture, and definitely one of them is going into the army with people that you might not have otherwise known. Judy, I see you. I'll call you in 1 second. One of the things that I didn't know when I was putting this text sheet together, but that I read up a little bit on, is, Kwanzaa is happening right now, and the way that Kwanzaa is celebrated is that I don't know if it's night, maybe it's every day, I'll call it day. Every day of the holiday has a specific virtue that you're supposed to discuss. Maybe Diane and Larry know more about this than I do, but discuss and kind of celebrate around. They're nodding, they're shaking their heads no. Okay, I'm just going to keep going then. And the first day is unity. And I thought it was really interesting that, again, I don't know if they calculate Kwanzaa night to night or day to day, but it would be interesting that today we are talking here, not only in our Torah, but also in our learning right now of unity, and that the African American culture is celebrating a holiday that today is discussing unity, right? This is something that clearly, and they're talking about, different tribes coming together. It's very similar that when we think about how we want to be as a people, as a nation, as a religion, we're always trying to figure out ways that we can be bringing things together. We don't like to emphasize separation. We like to emphasize bringing things together. So I just wanted to bring a little bit of cultural relevance into this discussion, even though we're not gonna study Kwanzaa today, but just an interesting piece to add that just happens to be a coincidence. Yeah, Judy.
So the concept of unification and the bringing of the different aspects of the brothers together to form a greater whole than the sum of the parts reminds me of, how do you build a mishkan? You have everybody bring not a whole shekel, but half a shekel, because my half and your half will create something bigger than our individual parts.
Beautiful, beautiful. Kathy or Barry, what the household Rosenblatt?
Barry. So beginning with the joke that I'm going to mix up that everybody knows about, two Jews on a deserted island, right? And I'll never daven in his shul, he'll never daven in my shul. So we have our Jewish traditions all over the world, and the Litovs just came up with one that we have the Mizrahim with Sephardim, we have all the subsects of all these other, all kinds of Ashkenazim. None of us daven in any other shuls. It's us. The miracle is not God's going to make this happen to us, as Ezekiel's prophecy. We need to do this. The miracle will be when we, us Jews, will learn how to be brothers and sisters to each other and unify ourselves. That's the miracle.
I think that that's actually what's being said here, and you said it really beautifully, that it's joined together in your hand. It later then says that it will be in the hand of God, but it first says that you're bringing these sticks together in your own hand so that you can literally feel them coming together, and hopefully then you have inspiration and motivation to do that work yourself. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, Rebecca.
Piggyback on the Rosenblatts here, that we Jews do care about other Jews. So in a sense, we are trying to, in that we care about Jews who are 9,000 miles away in Russia or in the Sudan or wherever they are. We care about them. If there's in Ethiopia, we try to bring them together. And we care about them. It's not, I mean, sometimes I wonder where Christians are being persecuted. Where's their help? But we care so long as we have Jews, we care about those Jews that are being hurt, and we want to help, and we do help them.
Yeah, Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh Bazeh, right? We help all people who we know are in need. Yes, Rebecca.
I wanted to go in a completely different direction. When you asked what it reminded us of, I was thinking of grafting, the process in agriculture, which I believe already did exist then, and where you take two trees that have a certain similarity, but one has certain benefits and the other has other, like one gives a good fruit, the other has better environmental sort of survival skills, and you combine them so that you get a better fruit or a better yield. So that's what it reminded me of.
One of the prominent words was eights in what Rick read.
Yeah, yeah, because it's talking about the stick, right? And that's being translated here as eights, right? Exactly. Yeah, and such a beautiful way of also thinking about what Dvorah brought up, which is the marriage piece, right? That you would take two people, or in the case that you're bringing up, right, two trees, one that brings one thing and one that brings another, and that together they hopefully make a better product than what they have individually, right? And for families that choose to have children or are blessed to have children, that's what parents hope for, right? That they are creating something that brings the best parts of both of them into the world.
And also we know that Yaakov knew about artificial insemination because he has how he bred the sheep and brought their characteristics together to make improve the gene pool.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I had never thought about that far. Yeah, Joanna.
Yes.
All of a sudden, this thought popped into my head that this is sort of an inverse of Brit Bein HaBetarim, right? So Brit Bein HaBetarim, we started with one thing and separated them. And here we're starting with two things and bringing them together. And I just noticed that like the end of this passage refers to a Brit Shalom.
Yeah.
And so somehow both Brit Bein HaBetarim with the promise of the land for the future. And this is sort of like the opposite end of that like, yes, you will be back together and you will get that land.
Mm-hmm. Great. We didn't yet read the Brit Shalom piece, but that's exactly the direction that I wasn't bringing up the connection that you brought up, but the idea of what the Brit Shalom can then do for us. So we'll go back to that in a few moments. Okay, last one. Tamar, did you want to share something?
Just the reconciliation of the personal, the familial with the national, which is so part of the story of the Jewish people and also is going to lead us into the next book of the Torah.
Yeah.
It just seems to me that we are define ourselves not only by our own family, but by our membership in the Jewish people.
Beautiful, beautiful. And Rabbi Shapiro and I recorded our podcast for the next 2 weeks because he's on vacation. So we did this week's Parsha on Tuesday and next week's Parsha on Wednesday. And so what we talk about for next week's Parsha is actually exactly that. Because what we see in the burial of both Jacob and Joseph, that they are surrounded by those who make them family, which is not just their blood family, but those who have come to be their family, whether it's the Egyptians or the community around them, right? That you are bringing together those that make you whole, and that is not necessarily just those who have the same DNA that you have. So we're gonna look now into. Oh yes, Larry or Diane, you're both very excited.
Actually, both want to say something, but what I'm saying, I give credit to Diane.
Okay.
She mentioned the story that's from Korach of all the tribes bringing sticks or rods together. And then Moses took them, and it was the staff of Aaron in the house of Levi that actually sprouted almond blossoms.
Right. Yes.
And I want to say one other thing, and that is if you go to the next verse after, if you go to 23, verse 23, nor shall they ever again defile themselves by their fetishes and their abhorrent things. It suggests that in order to have unification, that each has to give up something of their individual practices in order to become a unified whole.
Yeah, and which, as we all know, is very difficult, especially in partnership, right? And when you bring different pieces of something together to create a whole, it's not just that you can bring all of yourself to that partnership. You have to bring pieces of yourself, and other pieces get shed aside. So we're gonna move on. I know that other people have comments, but we're gonna move on just so that we don't spend the entire time on this, though it seems like we could have. I want us to go through some of the verses of the Joseph story and look at where there is separation and where there is the bringing together of the brothers with Joseph, because as some of you have mentioned, part of the reason that this Haftorah is used for this week's Parsha is because of that imagining of these two sides coming together, right? And as Larry pointed out, it's not really fair, because it's really Joseph against everybody else. It's not so much so that there are two equal sides. But we're going to look at for a moment at what the separation is, and was there a moment of reconciliation, or is it just kind of what it is, right? Is it just that they see one another, they're around one another? Is there actually wholeness together as one nation? So I'm gonna go through the verses pretty quickly, because the idea is not to focus on one verse, but to focus on the general picture you're getting from the verses. But I'll tell you where I'm reading from if you don't have the source sheet in front of you. So the first verses, the cluster of verses that I'm going to be reading from, is Genesis 44, chapter 44, verse 26 through 29. The brothers answered, "We cannot go down. Only if our youngest brother is with us can we go down, for we may not show our faces to the man unless our youngest brother is with us. But one is gone from me." And I said, "Alas," I have to give a little bit of context. This is Jacob. Okay, Jacob is now saying, "I've already lost a son. Don't take another one from me. But one is gone from me." And I said, "Alas, he was torn by a beast, and I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me too," meaning Benjamin, "and he meets with disaster, you will send my white head down to Sheol in sorrow," meaning you will put me into another state of depression, of sadness. So we see here that Joseph is asking for them all to be there, right? And that Jacob is basically saying, "No, let me keep one, because I've already lost one. I can't lose another." Now, he's pointing out that my dog has been joining us all morning and keeps opening the door to join us. So she's back. I keep hearing the door open and close. The way in which Jacob is describing this is that Joseph and Benjamin are the two sons that he's kind of the most worried about losing. So he's already lost Joseph. So to ask for Benjamin, it's as if he's going to lose his sons, right? We know there are many others, but he's talking about as if he's going to lose, that other son, and then his sons will be gone. So here too, there is separation, right? He's not allowing for them to all come back together. Chapter 45, verses 1 through 5 say, this is when they've all come down to Egypt. Joseph is in front of them, and he says, "Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, 'Have everyone withdraw from me,'" right? "Give me the room." So there was no one else about when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father well?" But his brothers could not answer him, so dumbfounded were they on account of him, right? Their faces literally dropped. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come forward to me." And when they came forward, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, he whom you sold into Egypt. Now do not be distressed or reproach yourselves because you sold me. It was to save life that God sent me ahead of you." So I want to take like one or two comments on this. Is this a moment of reconciliation, or is there still separation here? Yeah, Rick.
Okay, well, the trope on verse 5, Ve'ata, there's a separation there. It's not, they could have written it any way they wanted to, but they separated the munach there underneath Ve'ata. And now, so he's pausing, and now he's got a scepter in his hand, he's got whatever, and a little drama there waiting, making the brothers wait a little bit, if you want to read it that way. Al teatzvu da 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 is the revia. Don't be afraid, right? But the now is with a comma in the English is good because there's a separation there.
Great. So there we see that they're actually making separation, right? That Joseph is separating potentially between time and space, right? Between that's what happened before, but don't worry about it now because right now, first of all, we are together and you see me, you see I'm fine, and don't worry about it. God had a plan for why I would be separated from you, and that was so that I could save you. Difficult theology, not sure I agree with it, but it's what Joseph is saying. Any other thoughts on this particular verse? I can't see all pages, so that's why I'm... Oh yeah, Barry.
Yeah, so in the same vein, Joseph realizes he's enacting, he is enacting the dream that he had, and he is living at that level of the dream. His brothers are not at that level.
Okay, great. So to go back to the Ezekiel part then and using this dream as another visual, we are still at the stage where these are two different sticks, right? We're at the stage where Joseph is on one and all the other brothers are on the other. We haven't yet put them back together. So we're still two sticks away from a unified family and nation here. So now chapter 45 still, verse 15, and then verse 26. So this is first verse 15 first. Joseph kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. Only then were his brothers able to talk to him. Before I looked at the Haftorah, this was what I was going to talk about in a drush. This idea of only able to talk to him is an interesting thing. What does that mean? What does that say about their nature of sibling relationship? But anyway, it does seem to be that this is a moment where those sticks are coming closer together, right? We're coming more together as a unified family. Now, verse 26, and then Rabbi Lemley, I see you. And they told him, Joseph is still alive. Yes, he is ruler over the whole land of Egypt. His heart went numb. Jacob's heart went numb, for he did not believe them. Okay, Rabbi Susan Lemley.
But I was going to comment on the earlier, the 45:5, because I think that it's not separation. I think there's a sense of unification that's achieved there through looking at things from God's point of view. That Joseph takes a higher perspective, and without getting into free will or anything, he sees that it's all been, or he's trying to communicate to them the idea that it's all been for part of a larger scheme of things. And that removes the sense of guilt. He's trying to remove the sense of guilt from them and saying it was for a greater good. So I think it's a very noble and large-souled point of view, really.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I like the idea of thinking about it as kind of an eagle's eye view onto what was going on that makes it seem as though the way in which things were set out to be would be actually unifying, even if it meant separation first. I think there was at some point, Rabbi Shapiro and I talked about this in a podcast at the beginning of Breshit. I forget why though, that sometimes you need separation to actually come back together. And so potentially this is that moment where Joseph is saying, no, I was sent away, but it was so that we could be together, so that I could actually be with you in this moment of unification. That's great. I like that interpretation of it. So chapter 46, verse 4 says, I, God, will go down with you to Egypt, and I myself will also bring you back, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. So this is God speaking to Jacob about his death and how he will be with him every part of the way. This is the verse that I was talking about with the different numbers, with that commentary, and that Joseph will be the person by your side when you die. Now, chapter 49, verse 33. When Jacob finished his instructions to his sons, this is the moment of his death, he drew his feet into the bed, and breathing his last, he was gathered to his people. So this is a real moment of unification. And who are his people? right? Are his people like what we're talking about in Ezekiel, where all the nations will be together? Or are his people those who he's spent time with in his community? Or are his people his family? Which it doesn't say, right? So my guess is that's not what it was meant here, because it says amav, it doesn't say mishpachotav. So these last two pieces, and then I'm happy to hear some comments on this kind of limbo period between separation and unity. So chapter 50, verses 7 and 8. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the officials of Pharaoh, the senior members of his court, and all of Egypt's dignitaries, together with all of Joseph's household, his brothers and his father's household. Only their children, their flocks, and their herds were left in the region of Goshen. When we read this last piece here, you get this warm, fuzzy feeling of togetherness, right? They're all back. They came together for their father. But if we read it deeper into the text, it's unclear, and this goes back to Larry's point, it's unclear that it's really all the brothers, or if it's Joseph, Jacob, and everyone else. They're all there. But the fact that the Egyptians are also there, right? Did they recognize Jacob as an incredible figure? Did they recognize him as a leader like we do? Or were they there to console Joseph, who was part of their family and who, just like we do in modern day grief and Shiva and all of that, we go to be with the living. We go to console the living. So were they there to be with Joseph, or were they there to be with Jacob? And does that bring us a sense of wholeness, or a sense of there are pieces that are whole, but the family still is separate? Okay, I'm just putting those two out there. I'm not telling you what I think. I'm just putting those two out there. Any thoughts on this kind of middle piece here before we get to our last few verses? Yeah, Barry.
Well, there are a number of things that were said, Rabbi. Going back to gathered to his people.
Yeah.
It could also be to his ancestors and all of the above.
Beautiful.
And which brings back to Joseph, his first statements to his brothers, beginning from his position of separation and bringing in the sticks. When he touches each one of them, embraces each one of them, everyone knows when you have like a spark and you touch someone, you zap. So by touching each one, then he's brought everyone into the same level with him, so that sticks have come together by the touching. And when Yaakov dies, he's gathered together into that same wholeness that Joseph created when he touched his brothers. And the Egyptians coming up with Joseph, yes, I never thought of that before as being for his Shiva, but it also to ensure that they come back.
Great. Yeah, Devorah.
Well, to bring it on a personal level, I remember growing up that my dad would meet someone on the street and say, "Oh, Yankel Schwartz passed away." My dad would say, "Oh yeah, I remember him. I must go to the funeral." It was like, this is setting up that going to a funeral is a mitzvah. Yeah. You're doing something for the dead that they don't know about and they can't reciprocate. So that is something that has been like a lifelong tradition in our family, that you pay your respects at a funeral. And of course, that is something that we so miss today, not being able to have a Shiva and share memories and be at this specific time when you're there to honor somebody's life.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a unifier, right?
Yes, absolutely.
As we know, for so many families and even communities, that if someone passes away who either people have lost touch with or there has been strife with, that often we find that it's those moments of
unification
that brings everybody back together.
Oh.
Yeah. Thank you. Joanna.
When the word zap was just used, I thought the conversation was going in a whole different direction, which is where my mind went, which is all of a sudden I started thinking about that word to kiss, and that the showish actually has two meanings. It can be to kiss, or it can be a weapon. And my mind also went to the reunification between Jacob and Esav, and that the language here is very reminiscent. And I'm not as familiar here, but I know that there are a lot of midrashim about, like, was it really like an embrace of love, or did like Esav bite Yaakov?
Right.
And so I'm just sort of wondering now if, like, that ambiguity of, was this a true reconciliation? What was happening? In the way that text is interpreted, does some of that come in here?
Yeah, it's a great point, right? How much of it is kind of show or the need to do that rather than the actual embrace of love and care and, oh, everything is fine in the world. We're all good, right? Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. I've not seen commentaries like the ones that you're referring to about his kissing and hugging his brothers, but it's a very reminiscent piece, and one that Joseph, without potentially even knowing, takes on that his father once did when he's interacting with his brothers. So you see these mirror effects of their story coming about, even when Joseph potentially doesn't know that that's how his father interacted with his brother. So here are the last few verses, and then we're going to tie it back in with the Haftorah. So these are the last few verses of the entire book of Bereshit. And it's chapter 50, verses 24, 25, and 26. So we're going to see, again, this is not this week's Parsha, this is next week's Parsha, but we'll see here what potentially what unification is happening, or what the Torah imagines the unification was at the end here. At length, Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die. God will surely take notice of you and bring you up from this land to the land that God promised on oath to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. So Joseph made the sons of Israel swear by saying, when God has taken notice of you, you shall carry up my bones from here. Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and he was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. These verses are what Rabbi Shapiro and I are going to talk about in next week's podcast, so feel free to listen. You can unpack these verses for days. These are very intense verses that have many different interpretations, many different meanings. You could use a therapist to go into the story of Joseph, and they would have a great time with how he's even ending his life in relationship with them. I want to read you one commentary. I brought no other commentaries today. I want to bring one commentary for us to read on this verse, chapter 50, verse 25. The meaning of the verse there is that Moses felt that unless he located Joseph's remains and took them with, the entire nation would be guilty of not honoring their oath, the oath being bringing them all together. So it seems to be that our Torah thinks that this is a moment of unity. This is a moment of bringing things together. If we go back to thinking of that image in Ezekiel of bringing two sticks together, it seems to be that our rabbis want to read that into these verses, right? That the reason that Joseph tells his brothers what to do with him once he's died is because it will also allow for the community to come together around him and around one another, as Devorah brought up. But my question is, based on all of these verses and kind of the trajectory of the story here, and knowing what we heard from Ezekiel, is this unity? Is this a bringing together? If we stop here, I'm not talking about if we then go into Exodus. If we stop here at the end of Joseph's life, is this unity? Is this a bringing together of Joseph and his brothers, of Joseph and a people? Is that what we're seeing in this in this moment here? And I would love to hear your thoughts, yes or no, as to if that's the connection that we are trying to make between our Torah and our Haftorah. Yeah, Barry.
Somebody commented earlier discussion that the coming together, the bringing together of each must give up something to make whole. It's not a miracle that comes down and brings us together. It's we, the parts, each of us must give up part of ourself to make the whole. We don't take care of the other parts. They don't take care of our part. Each of us gives up something to create the whole. So to answer your question, Rabbi, no.
Okay. I was gonna push you if you didn't give me an answer. I was gonna say, so what do you think? Great. Okay.
Wait.
Kathy.
So while we're unmuted, I'll just I think maybe Jacob probably, or Joseph, I guess we're talking about Joseph, right?
Yeah.
That Joseph just didn't want to be left behind, because there is no, at least in the Torah portion, maybe in the prophets, about going and finding his, or his bones once they got into Israel. It wasn't that those who stayed on the east side had to go with the brothers, the families, and go find Joseph. It was they had to go fight to get in. So that whole scene is sort of, well, you all went, everybody went for our father. I think it's more, I want the same kavod. I took care of you. I brought you, I kept you coming back, and I took care of it. I want that same kavod as my father got of everybody going and taking my bones.
It's interesting that you say that, because this commentary that goes on, I didn't read the next part, but I'll read this next sentence because it's what you're bringing up for us, Kathy, that it says, Joseph had the extraordinary merit that 600,000 men all functioned as his pallbearers, to go back to Devorah's comment about a funeral, throughout the many years they were in the desert, until finally they laid him to rest. So the fact that we all carried, not we, but the people all carried him, and that we acted as bringing those pieces, quote, together, as opposed to leaving him alone, and that needed to continue. And supposedly, according to Rabbi Bachya, he believes that did continue because the bones were traveled with the people as if they were a unifier. Yeah, Joanna.
There's a difference between Yaakov's death and Yosef's, in that Yaakov is almost immediately taken back to Canaan, whereas Yosef lingers and remains until all the people go. And I think perhaps there is a message of unity. Like, he wanted to rest where his people were. So when his family and his people were in Egypt, he was there with them. And then only when they left did he go with them. And I don't know, I see some sort of message in that difference of.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I think one of the things that Rabbi Shapiro and I talk about is that with Jacob's death, there was like all this pomp and circumstance, right? With all these different people who were around. And when you get to Joseph, you might not have expected this, but Joseph is only surrounded by his brothers. Right, which is interesting, because though, as you're saying, those two deaths are very different, and you might expect actually the opposite for each, right? That Jacob would only be surrounded by his family, and that Joseph would be surrounded by the Egyptians, for whom they were his adopted family. And yet we get here that there is more of this intimacy and this potentially moving forward as a unified unit. That's redundant, but you know what I mean, as a group together, after being buried and being gathered by his own family. Zvi, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the altar footnote on the phrase "take up my bones."
Yeah.
It's a brief one. It says, although Joseph knows that Egyptian science will turn his body into a mummy, he still thinks of his remains in Hebrew terms as he invokes his eventual restoration to the land of the Hebrews. In other words, he sees himself as part of the unified whole, clearly to the moment of his death, and wants that to be maintained in terms of where he eventually winds up.
100%, and I agree with Alter and with your comments on it. I think the thing that strikes me is that by Joseph saying that he sees himself as a unifier, is he a unifier? Right? If you say, I'm a unifier, are you putting yourself in front of other people and therefore distancing yourself? Or are you in fact just taking note of being able to gather people around you? And I don't know. I didn't know Joseph, so I can't ask him what he meant by that. But I agree with Alter's explanation. And I guess that explanation is exactly what's making me think more deeply if that acknowledgement actually acts as a separator. I don't know.
Did Joseph die before all of his brothers?
Yes, Joseph dies first. Yeah.
So, I mean, seems to me that's significant, that he's a lot younger than his brothers. And he has the blessing of divine understanding, yet he dies before all of his brothers. So this is disunifying because his brothers are all unified. And he's singled out, being much younger than his brothers, to die before his brothers.
Yeah.
It's God to me, because normally the youngest doesn't die first.
True. He's not the youngest, but he is closer to the youngest than the others, for sure. And the rabbis have a very good time talking about why did he have to die first. And you're right that they see it as a unifier, and they see it as a way for the brothers to be able to come together around him. And again, similar to what I was saying to Tzvi, is that not a unifier, right? Is that actually proving more distance than not? Larry, and then Jennifer.
So I'm going to go back to answering your question. And my answer is not necessarily, but it's part of the ebb and flow of unity and division. So what do I mean by that? We're talking about whether this death was actually a unifying event.
Yeah.
So think about families, for example, where people come together in the event of a death of a matriarch or patriarch or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But very often the story shows them splitting apart thereafter. Mm-hmm. Think about nations where people come together in the face of some traumatic action, maybe a 9/11 type of action or a war. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't take too long till the divisions split them apart again. Sure. So I don't know where I would go with this in terms of this particular story, but in terms of Ezekiel, this ebb and flow of unity and division seems to be a normal fact of life, of families, of ethnic groups, of nations. And as Gabrielle pointed out, it's a fact of life of Jews. Mm-hmm. And the only remarkable thing about us is not that we are split at times or almost at all times, but that we actually manage somehow to come back together. And even in our coming back together as in Israel, we have these deep divided splits.
Yeah. So
they actually coincide as well as ebb and flow.
Great. And Jennifer, I'm going to call on you and then I'll wrap up. I just want to, Rabbi Kligfeld often speaks about Tameh and Tahor as two sides of a line that when you bring them together, they're actually touching, right? That there's a very fine distinction between Tameh and Tahor, which are seen as opposites, but that if you actually look at what they are, they're not really opposites. They just give opposite opportunities. And so when we're talking about unity and separation, I think about them, especially in how you just described it, Larry, as not necessarily separate on a spectrum very far apart from one another, but actually there is a hairline fraction between the two that if we are together, we need to work very hard to remain on the other side of that fraction before we become distant from one another again. And so seeing these two things in parallel to one another is all that more powerful, because you need to work at keeping a group together, keeping a group unified, or else it's very easy to become, as you said, like right after 9/11, not right after, but after 9/11, it was very easy for us to become a fractured country again. So thank you for bringing that up. Jennifer. Wait, unmute first. Unmute.
There we go. I found this last part, if I get anything from this, it's Joseph holding himself apart from everybody. I am about to die. God will surely take notice of you, not sort of an us or B'nai Israel, and bring you up from this land that he promised to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, almost not taking any place in this family. And so I find that actually quite striking, that he starts, he's sold into slavery. We have the coming together, the going, whether they became a whole or a part, but it would seem here that he's putting himself again sort of separate, not above, but separate from the life of his brothers.
Right. And to go with that, with kind of the trajectory of what we've heard now from Svi and from Larry, is that this idea that those two things are so close to one another, right? He separates himself from his brothers, but potentially he's separating himself from his brothers so that they come together, right? But is that unity, or is that separation? So I'm going to bring us back to Ezekiel. And I knew that there was not going to be an answer here, right? There's no way for us to answer this, for me to say, this is the right way, this is the answer. But this line that Joanna actually brought up for us at the beginning, that comes from Ezekiel 37:26, which I believe is actually one of the last, if not the last, no, it's the second to last verse of this week's Haftarah, that says, I will make a covenant of friendship with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them. This is God. I will establish them and multiply them, and I will place my sanctuary among them forever. What I hear from that many of you have touched on, is that it's not about whether or not Joseph knew that he was bringing everybody together, but it was about what they did with the moments of unity to be together. So just like in this ending where Joseph is putting his brothers in a room together to say, this is what you're together going to do with me as I die. Sure, there's a separation there, but it's a way of putting the onus on the brothers so that they can come together. They have a reason for being together. And this Brit Shalom, right, this covenant, JPS translates it as friendship, but really it's a covenant of peace, which is a much bigger word than friendship. A way of being able to provide wholeness, shalem. That's on us. That's on people. That's on people to find. That's on people at a funeral to be able to bring together. That's on people in a community to take care of someone who's in the hospital. That's on people to be able to find moments of unity when we are separated. And I think that one of the reasons that this is so, it's stuck in my brain this year, as I mentioned, I love talking about Joseph every year, but the reason that this particular piece of the Joseph story stuck out to me is because we are all in individual boxes right now on this screen, right? We are more separated than ever before. And yet we are actually much more together. We are completely unified because we are choosing to be in this experience, right? We're choosing to be on this screen, in this experience, whether in your homes or wherever you are. We're part of this experience. And when it says, I will place my sanctuary, my mikdashi betocham, right? It brings us back to that idea of build me a sanctuary, right? Oh Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary. That if we build something together to be able to be unified in, that is unity. And that we then have to work to make sure that we do not become separate when we are back together again. When we are able to be back together again, we need to find ways to not separate ourselves. When those shul doors open, we need to come back to shul. Because the reason that we come to shul is to be together. The idea is unity, to bring one another together, not to separate out. And I think that that's what's happening with Joseph at the end of his story. He realizes that in order for everyone to be together in a moment of obvious separation, if he dies, he's no longer around, that he needs to bring them together in some way that they will stay together, that they will recognize that separation is no longer an option because they've had moments of separation and it didn't do them any good. So these sticks coming together, Joseph's brothers coming together, this is all a reminder that separation is very clear. We can separate much easier than we can come together. But it's those moments of coming together that remind us that that's what's important. So I hope that while we're still in this, maybe even deeper than we've ever been before, that you feel the togetherness, that you feel the community, that you feel this unity, and that we keep that feeling forever, even when we are able to and have the freedom to separate, that we're able to keep those two sticks of ours together and find ourselves as one whole nation. So Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for doing such an intense study with me this morning. So this was the plan all along, was that we're going to then now finish very quickly with the prayers for our country and for Israel. Again, bringing a little bit of that unity into our regular service. We will then do Ashrei, of course, and then do Ein Keloheinu Aleinu and close out with Mourner's Kaddish. So the prayer for our country is on page 177 or page 148 or page 414. Our God and God of our ancestors, with mercy accept our prayer on behalf of our country and its government. Pour out your blessing upon this land, upon its inhabitants, upon its leaders, its judges, officers, and officials who faithfully devote themselves to the needs of the public. Help them understand the rules of justice you have decreed, so that peace and security, happiness and freedom will never depart from our land. Adonai, God whose spirit is in all creatures, we pray that your spirit be awakened within all the inhabitants of our land. Uproot from our hearts hatred and malice, jealousy and strife. Plant love and companionship, peace and friendship among the many peoples and faiths who dwell in our nation. Grant us the knowledge to judge justly, the wisdom to act with compassion, and the understanding and courage to root out poverty from our land. May it be your will that our land be a blessing to all who dwell on earth, and may you cause all peoples to dwell in friendship and freedom. Speedily fulfill the vision of your prophets. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. For all of them, from the least of them to the greatest, shall know me, and let us say, Amen. A prayer for the state of Israel on the following page. Avinu Shebashamayim, Tzur Yisrael Vegoalo, Barech Medinat Yisrael Reshit Smichat Geulatenu, Hagen Aleha Be'evrat Chastecha, Ufros Aleha Sukat Shlomecha, Ushlach Orcha V'mitcha L'Rasheha Sareha Ve'yotzeha, V'taknem Be'itza Tova Milfanecha, Chazek Yedideh Migne Eretz Kodshenu, V'hanchilem Eloheinu Yeshua, V'ateret Nitzachon Ta'atrem, V'natata Shalom Ba'aretz, V'simchat Olam Le'yoshveha, V'nomar Amen. We will go to Ashrei now, page 181, page 151, or page 420. Ashrei Shevetechad Yeluchasel Hashem Shechad Hashem Shadal Havti LaDavid. תהילת אדוני ידבר פי ויברך כל בשר שם קודשו לעולם ועד ואנחנו נברך יה מעתה ועד עולם. Hallelujah. We will skip the whispered Amidah, and you are more than welcome to do it on your own. After we conclude services, we will continue now with Ein Keloheinu on page 204. Do I have it here? Yes, 204, 182, and 508. Just because I'm in the mood, we're going to do the Ladino version. So if you don't have the Ladino version because your Siddur doesn't have the Ladino version, you'll just sing the Hebrew parts, and we'll sing the Ladino parts for you. But if you're in the Lev Shalem, it's on the left column. Okay, it goes like this. En Keloheinu, en Kadonenu, en Kemakenu, en Kemoshienu, non koramos Dios, non koramos Dios, non koramos Ere, non koramos Dios Salvador. Mi Keloheinu, mi Kadonenu, mi Kemakenu, mi Kemoshienu, ken koramos Dios, ken koramos Señor, ken koramos Ere, ken koramos Salvador. No del Eloheinu, no del Adonenu, no del Makenu, no del Mashienu, no remas mas Dios, no remas mas Señor, no remas mas Ere, no remas mas Salvador. Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Makenu, Baruch Mashienu, bendicho mas Dios, bendicho mas Señor, bendicho mas Ere, bendicho mas Salvador. Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Mashienu, Tu el Master Dios, Tu el Master Dios, Tu el Master Tu el Master Salvador. En Keloheinu, en Kadonenu, en Kemalkeinu, en Kemashienu, Yananana, 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 Yananana. It's not really fair to do that when you don't all have the Ladino, but hopefully that was a fun thing to sing along to. Page 205, Aleinu, if you're able to do so, please rise. Aleinu l'shabeach ladon hakol latet gedula leotzer breshit shelo asanu kegoi ha'aratzot velo samanu kemishpachot ha'adama shelo samchakenu kahem vegor aleinu pechol hamonam v'anachnu korim u'mishtachavim u'modim lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu shenu t'shamayim v'yasaner. Kakatu b'toratech Adonai yimlach le'olam va'ed v'ne'emar v'haya Adonai le'melech al kol haaretz bayom ahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad. Mourner's Kaddish, page 207, page 184, or page 512. Yit gadal ve'yit kadash shemei Rabbi be'alma divra kirutei ve'amlich malchutei b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol beit Israel ba'agala u'vizman kari ve'imru amen yehei shemei Rabbi mevarach le'olam lo'amei almaya Yit barach ve'yishtabach ve'yit pa'ar ve'yit romam ve'yit naseh ve'yit hadar ve'yit aleh ve'yit halal shemei dekudesha brechu la'ela min kol birchata ve'shirata tushbechata ve'nechemata da'amiran be'alma ve'imru amen. Yehei shalom arab amin shemaya ve'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav hu ya'aseh shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Shabbat shalom again, everyone. It's really lovely to see you all, those of you whose faces I can see and those whose names I can see. Really, really lovely to have you. And I hope that you've had a wonderful extended weekend. Tonight at 4:35, I will be leading Mincha, doing a little bit of teaching on next week's Parsha, not as long as today's, and then Mariv. Zoom out of Shabbat, which is typically a different link, will actually be on this same link because I am also leading that, so I can't be in multiple places at once, so we're having everybody come to us. So if you usually join us for Zoom out of Shabbat, it's this same link. This will remain open, though the live stream will end. And we hope you will join us for some of those things. If not, join us for programming during the week. Yasher Koach to Barry again for reading Torah, and for Josh Jacobs for Linus and Shacharit, and for Rick for always jumping into that half Torah even when it wasn't planned. And that is all. I don't think there are any other announcements. Does anybody have any announcements? No? Okay. While you're all leaving, I'll sing Adon Olam, because I know that some of us enjoy it, and you are more than welcome to leave, and Shabbat Shalom, and I will sing you out as you leave. Adon Olam asher malach b'terem kol yetzir nivra le'nasa b'chefso kol azay melech shemo nikra ve'acharei kichlot hakol levado imloch nahora vehu haya vehu hove vehu yeh b'tifara vehu echad ve'en sheni lehamshil lo lehachbira beli reshit beli tachlit velo haoz vehamisra vehu eli vechai goali vetzorchev li behet sahara vehu nisi umanos li menat kosi beyom ekra beyado avkid ruchi beiti shan ve'ahira ve'imruchi geviati Adonai li velo ira. Shabbat Shalom. Just want to thank Kenji and say a Merry Christmas to Kenji for being with us. It is not an easy weekend to need a non-Jew to help us with our services. And we appreciate you always, Kenji, and thank you for being with us this morning. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. See you later.